Good afternoon and welcome to Zoom In on a Fresh Conversation. It is Monday evening all over again. I don't know what time it is. It's been that kind of day. And I am your host, Donna Gray Banks. And tonight on Zoom In on a Fresh Conversation, I have the honor of interviewing Mr. Rob Whiting. He's a lecturer, a historian, and a musician. Welcome to Zoom In on a Fresh Conversation, Mr. Whiting. Nice
Well,
to have
thank you,
you.
Donna. I appreciate you inviting me.
Thank you. Zoom In on a Fresh Conversation is brought to you by Eyeless Diamonds LLC, Lee's Press, my publisher for my books, a Dante production, whose jazz series continues at Cinematique on August 11th with Adam Kornecki, and the Fresh Book Festival, which is it's coming up too fast for me, February 20th through the 22nd in the year of 2025. Please put it on your calendar. Robert Whiting. If you have any questions for him, please leave it in the chat room. And this conversation is being recorded. Good evening, Mr. Whiting. Please give us a brief introduction about who you are.
Okay, Donna, I was born in Washington, D.C., and matriculated through the public schools there. And my father, when he retired, decided that he wanted to farm. So he bought a 22-acre farm in Virginia. And my brother and I used to go and visit him because he and my mom had divorced.
What part of
And
Virginia?
uh, a place called Orange, Virginia, which is about 60 miles outside of DC.
Okay.
Um, and it was wonderful for me because I was starting to do some of the things that uh, kids in the city do, like
Young people do.
walk into the five and dime store and walk out with something, and you know how that goes, and then it progresses, and next thing you know, you're caught up in the criminal justice system. So when he bought this farm, and my brother and I used to go down during the summers to visit. And after a couple of years, we decided that we wanted to stay with him,
Oh,
which was really one of the best decisions that my brother and I made because I got a chance to connect with a Black community uh, in Virginia. We people lived on a horseshoe, so they were shaped like a horseshoe.
mm,
Most people everybody had their homes, everybody had farm land. We had 22 acres, some people had 50, 60 acres. Everybody had guns and everybody knew how to shoot.
amen.
But very interesting, we never shot
Not
one
one.
another. Nobody ever shot anybody else. We got into some fights, but nobody ever pulled out a gun and shot someone. But I was able to experience what a community really should be. For example, we had a family, a very large family, with about 9 children, and they fell on hard times. So families in the community just took the kids. We took a young man named Robert Lee, and he stayed with us for a year. And once the
Mm,
family got back together, all the kids went back. So that was the type of community that I was able to experience there in Virginia. In addition to hard work, like walking behind a flatbed wagon, throwing hay up on the wagon, stacking up on a wagon, and going into a barn that was about 110 degrees, with all the dust flying around. So I knew what hard work was. So
yeah.
when I when I went back to DC and I got an office job, I thought I was in heaven.
What?
I went to work every day. But anyhow, that's a brief, synopsis of my life. And of course, while I was in DC, I attended college there for undergrad and grad school.
And where'd
And
you go?
I went to the University of the District of Columbia for undergrad.
UDC.
Yeah, and
It's huge now. It's
oh, it's
huge.
huge. And George Washington University. And
And it's huge now.
oh, it's huge. Yeah, they just raised $1 billion endowment in 4 years. So, they're
Yeah.
real huge.
Yeah.
But I was surprised when I went to GW because I thought since it was in the city, right in downtown DC, that we would have plenty of African Americans in grad school. Well, to my surprise, I was the only one sitting in class
The
most
only.
of the time. A
Oh,
couple of Africans eventually got into the program. And then, my emphasis was finance and investment. So oftentimes that scares us, which it shouldn't, because we were the first mathematicians. But so I graduated, and then I was working in the federal government, and eventually retired from the federal government in 2001, and went into the private sector, and stayed in the private sector for about 4 years, where I was a vice president. And once I retired from there, we moved to Palm Coast.
well, let me say that in the meantime, in between time, you did a lot of history background,
Oh, yes.
right? In all the time that you were in school and being part of the federal government and then moving to Palm Coast. And I read that for over 40 years, you have researched Africa, right?
Absolutely.
Particularly, yeah, go ahead. Particularly the Nile Valley civilization.
Absolutely. Because what happened, once I had gotten my master's degree, I thought I was educated. Okay. So until I went to was one of the parks in DC, and they had a Malcolm X Day festival. It was on Anacostia Park, as I think about it. And I was walking around, and I've always been an avid reader. And I ran up on this brother who had these tables out with all of these books. And I started browsing and realized that I had never seen any of those books. I had never heard of any of those books. And I had never been taught from any of those books. So that got my attention. I was with some other folks. So I got his number, and he told me that he was going to open up a bookstore, and that, if I gave him a call, that I could come by and check out his books. I was so excited. I mean, I really was. I couldn't
Yeah,
believe it.
yeah.
I couldn't believe all these books out here about Africans and Black people. So I called him that Sunday and went over to his house, and he uh, directed me to his basement, and I walked down into his basement, and he had books stacked from the floor to the ceiling. It was incredible. So he left me down there, and after about an hour, I was browsing. I was so lost. I called him. I said, his name was Adari. I said, Adari, I don't even know where to start. I am so ignorant. I said, can you recommend a couple of books for me to start with? And he did. And that's when I started reading. And after about a year or so, I really got serious. I started doing empirical
Mhm.
research. And after 5 years, I was an angry Black man. And the reason I was angry,
Angry and knowledgeable at the same
yeah,
time.
yes, yeah. Well, not that I was going to do harm to anyone,
Right.
but I realized
How much you
that
didn't
I,
learn.
I hadn't been educated. I had been trained to go and work into a system, okay, and to perpetuate that system. Yes, I can make decent money because I had punched the tickets, so to speak,
That's
okay,
right. That's
and I
right.
had some skills that I learned while I was in undergrad and grad school. But I realized after reading that a true education is knowledge of self. And when one doesn't have knowledge of self, it doesn't matter whether you have a PhD or master's or undergrad or no degree, and it doesn't matter how smart you are. You're
Right.
not educated. And see, this is how we are tricked. We think, oh, I went to Harvard and I got a, with this and that. And you walking around and know very little knowledge about yourself, your people, their customs, and the most important thing, their spirituality and what that really means.
Well, that was all systematic, of course.
Yes.
And
It-
it's kind of coming to a head right now.
yeah, it's coming to a head because
Mhm.
I think that anyone who is observing what's happening today, when they weren't teaching us much as it was. Now they're trying to take away the little that they were teaching and not teach us anything except that, we were taught skills when we were enslaved, which is an insult because it implies that we didn't have any skills
When we brought
when
the
we
skills
were
with us,
enslaved.
we brought
Yeah,
the skills
we were
with
stolen from the continent.
we brought the skills with us. The
Oh, yes.
rotating of crops and all that that the Europeans
Oh,
didn't know anything about.
waterways, experts in water, experts in rice, growing rice and all types of plants, experts in looking at the stars and knowing where you are and how to get to certain places. Those were skills that we developed. See, over 200,000 years. And see, this is another problem that we have even today in the school system. When you talk about Black history, if you don't start 200,000 years ago, you're being misled.
Right.
You're being hoodwinked because we were the first Homo sapiens, modern humans on the planet. No doubt it's been proven through paleontology, DNA analysis, et cetera, et cetera. We have found the artifacts that we were here over 200,000 years ago. And so it was an African woman who looked like the modern day Twa, or we call them the Bushmen, or the Kusan people, that was everybody's mother on the planet, a Black woman. And see, and this is the truth that they don't want to teach us because they want to hoodwink us with this race thing, Black race, white race, Asian race, when there's only one race, the human race, which started in Africa. And that's what our children are not being taught. So they grow up being confused. I'm multiracial, I'm this, I'm that. And it just causes a lot of confusion. But that's by design. That's part of the system, the way it operates.
Systematic. For sure. And so the first solar calendar was developed by Africans and was aligned with the natural flow of the solar year in the northern hemisphere. The calendar used in most parts of the world today was developed in Africa, copied and modified by the Romans. Talk about the development of the calendar and how it had been modified.
Okay. Yes, and so and this is one of the after the pyramids on the Giza plateau. I think this, in my opinion, this is one of the greatest contributions to the world that Black folk gave, and it only could have happened in Africa on the Nile River uh, for people to be able to figure it out because it's extremely complex. I can't tell you how many nights I've stayed up 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning because I've had to become a sort of a quasi astronomer
Absolutely.
to understand how they were able to do this. And so we have to remember that Black folk have been here over 200,000 years. So we had Black folk who were stargazers, who had an interest or a love in watching the heavens and tracking the stars at night. And we have to remember, especially on the Nile River, as you go north, that it only rains 2 or 3 inches a year. So every night was practically clear, the same during the day. So they could track the stars. And plus, when you're near the equator, it's almost as if you can touch the stars. You can't even imagine
You
how
see it
bright,
all.
how they look when you're on the equator, okay, or
Right.
near the equator. Anyhow, so they started figuring
And
out.
the Nile River runs north. There's not, I think
Yes,
there's 5 other rivers. One
yeah,
is the
yeah.
St.
Yeah,
John's.
yeah, it runs from south to north. It's about
Yeah,
3 or 4 rivers that do
yeah,
that. It's
yeah.
very unusual.
Very unusual.
So that's why the African orientation was a southern orientation. Up to them was south, down was north.
Right.
Okay. But anyhow, so they started observing the stars. And the first indication, we have an artifact called the Lubumbo bone, which is around over 35,000 years old, where it has 29 markings on it. This is the oldest evidence of counting in the world. Why aren't our children taught that? Why aren't we taught that? Okay. It was found in the Congo. All right. Now, what does that mean? That meant that Africans had been either counting the moon
Mm.
or the menstrual cycle. It could have been both, but it's 29 markings on that. All right. And then we get to the Ishango bone, which is about 25,000 years old. It has advanced mathematics in it. It has units of 10, prime numbers, which is any number that can be divided by itself and one. Okay. And the prime numbers were from 11 up to 19. It has duality. It has units of 10. So this was 25 years ago, 25,000 years ago in Africa.
Right,
Why
along.
aren't we taught that? And see, this is the type of information when I started reading it, I couldn't believe it. And so I had to start checking and doing research. And then I was fortunate, and we were fortunate in DC. All of the top scholars like Dr. Ben, Dr. Asa Hilliard, Dr. John Henry Clark, John G. Jackson, Ivan Van Sertima, everybody came through DC. And we had a large, what we call African-centered population there. And so I have books signed by out of these guys. I've sat at their feet. And of course, we had Dr. Welshing there, who I didn't understand why, when I was working at the Department of Agriculture, and my office, I used to have a window that faced the mall. And during the spring, white folk will come out there like ants and out there sunning. Okay. And I thought it was interesting because I'm thinking to myself, wait a minute, they're trying to get brown, but yet they say something is wrong with being black and brown. And then when I read Dr. Francis' paper, it unlocked the keys to why they do that. Okay, which I'm not going to get. That's a whole different discussion there. I don't want to get off into that. I'm going to stick with the calendar. But so anyhow, so as the Africans were coming up the Nile, in order for them to survive, they had to know when the Nile was going to overflow. Because if they didn't, their communities would be destroyed, people would be killed. So they noticed that whenever the star Sirius, which is one of the brightest stars in the heaven, would come up just before the sun came up, okay, we call it the Hilarical rising of Sirius. Hilarical is a Greek word for star. They would notice that 3 to 4 weeks later, the Nile would overflow. So it gave them 3 to 4 weeks to prepare
Pull back.
for the overflowing of the Nile. All right. So once that was done, then they had a season for planting. Okay. A season for growing, and then a season for harvesting. But their livelihood depended on that. Plus, when the Nile had overflowed for that 3 to 4 month period, that's when they would have public work projects, and that's when they would build the temples and the pyramids. There's no evidence whatsoever of these Africans on the Nile enslaving people. We have the records. We found the communities where they lived when they were working on the pyramids and on the temples. We found the food they ate. We found the salary charts. We were the first accountants. We have accounting records. In fact, the first strike in the world was in Africa, where the workers didn't feel as if they were getting paid enough. They went on strike. Now, this is in writing. They went on strike, okay? 5,000 years ago. And guess what? They won. They got higher pay. All right. So we had these records, but the system is such that they won't even admit that these were Africans. I've heard scholars white scholars actually say, oh, they were black, but they weren't African. They were brown, but they weren't African.
They
But
were
anyhow,
aliens. They were
yeah,
aliens.
yeah. So we realized that whenever we saw um, Sirius and the sun come up together, that 3 to 4 weeks later, the Nile would overflow. Okay. We also noticed that during the spring equinox, where you have equal day and equal night, that every 10 days, a new crop of stars will come up. So the Africans had a 10-day week based on the nature. All right. This is important. And so they had a 10-day week. So the people worked, or some of the people worked 9 days and they were off a day. They had 3 weeks in a month. All right. So you had the months of 30 days each, which gave them 360. And then they had a 5-day festival to worship various deities at the end, which gave them 365. That wasn't by accident, because they noticed that whenever Sirius and the sun would come up again, it would be on what we call their July, on our summer solstice, July the 21st. It has
Right.
moved since that time. Of course, it's all over the place now. And they realized, and this was the key, every 4 years, the heliacal rising of Sirius, which is the Sirius and the sun coming up together, would fall back a day every 4 years. So they figured out, okay, if that's the case, in order for this calendar to go back around to Wet-Pet, Ren-Pet, which is what they call the new year, it would take 1,460 years. And another amazing thing about our ancestors, their perspective on time was just something that we can't even comprehend. They looked at time in terms of 25,000 years, 1,400 years, because they were looking at the planets and they had observed these configurations and these cycles. So every 1,460 years, if you divide every 4 years, that gives you 365. The calendar will come back around and they would have the beginning of their new year, okay, again. All right. Now this is another thing. So now during this the spring equinox, they noticed when another spring equinox would occur, all right, and they noticed that there was a slight time difference between when the spring equinox would occur. It was 365 0.24 days versus for Sirius, it was 365.25. They were such geniuses that they took the lunar calendar, which is their 30-day calendar, that was the lunar calendar, with the solar calendar, which was at 365.24 days, which occurred during the spring equinox, with the stellar calendar, which was based on the star Sirius, integrated all of those calendars together. So they had a 30-day month, all right, and 12 months for a year, 5-day festival, which gave them 365, and 1,460 years. Basically, the calendar would reconcile itself and start back at the beginning.
Square one.
Yes, square one. Now, in order for anyone to really figure this out, they had to know about the precession of the equinoxes. And I want to try to keep this simple, okay? I don't want to lose you.
Okay, go ahead.
Is everybody okay out there?
I think we're okay.
I don't hear any noise.
Because they're all on mute.
Oh, they're on mute. That's why. Okay, all right, fine. Okay. The Earth, and I got to try to make this basic. The Earth tilts on its axis 23.5 degrees. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So the Earth is circulating around and it's rotating around the planet. Okay. And so it takes that the Earth slightly longer to do that than the stars that are stationary when the Earth is rotating and going around the sun. So that's where that difference comes in. But it's called a precession of the equinox. And so it takes the 7 polar stars, 25,000, approximately
Mm.
25,890 years to make a complete circle to come back to the beginning around what we now are. We are in Polaris. But the polar star changes over time every 3,160 years. Okay. Now, so they figured out that they called it the Great Year, and this is in a lot of their writing. So we know that they knew this. We know that they had figured it out because you really can't fully understand the solar year unless you understand the precession of the equinoxes. That 25,890-year cycle, that
Mm-hmm.
it takes that long for the polar stars to go around. They also saw during the spring equinox that every 2,160 years, a new sign would emerge on the horizon. We call that an age. And we're now in the age of Pisces. Okay. Before that, we were in the age of Taurus. That's why you see a lot of the bull symbol in symbolism in the Bible. Then once we switched to the age of Pisces, all of a sudden the fishes became important. The 5 fish and 2 loaves of bread, okay? A Jonah in the well. All of this symbolism is coming out of these different ages because these ages have an influence on the planet. Now, I know some people say, oh God, here we go. Okay, I want you to think about this. Think about the moon. Think about the moon and the gravitational force of the moon causes the tides. This planet is comprised primarily of water. Millions and millions and tons of water moves as a result of the gravitational pull of the moon. You don't think that has an impact on us in some shape, form, or fashion?
Not when your body is made out of 96 points whatever percent water. Of course, it has a really big effect on
Okay.
feel,
Now,
headaches, all kind of stuff happen.
yes. Now, uh, my wife and I found this out accidentally. We were up in New York in Times Square at the Marriott, and we were on something like the 30th floor. And we had planned on getting up early that morning, but in this hotel room, they had these heavy drapes. And so the room was completely dark. Well, when we woke up and we looked at the clock, it was 10:30.
Ooh,
And we never sleep that late. And we're
never.
like, well, how could that happen? You know? And so we didn't figure it out the first time. Well, a couple of days later, we slept late again. And then it dawned on us. The room was dark.
Yeah.
It had an impact on how well we slept and how long we slept.
They have
Okay.
to do that in Alaska for sure.
Yes, yes. And also that's why in a lot of countries where up in the Nordic countries where they don't get a lot of light, they drink a lot of alcohol, they have a lot of depression because they don't get a lot of light. So these the planets and the cosmos has a tremendous influence on us. We know, for example, that the dates that we have are accurate because the Africans talked about the Wet Renpet, and the Romans were able to date this Hilarical Rising of Sirius in 140 AD. Okay. And then if you go
So
back,
that's serious that you're using. Do you
Pardon?
know the spelling of Sirius?
Yes, Sirius. It's like Sirius Radio.
I was getting ready to say, yeah. So that's where they
Yes.
got that from. All right, go
Yeah,
ahead.
yes, absolutely, absolutely. So what happens is, so we go back every 1,460 years, which was the cycle that they used for Sirius to come back to its original point. And so we can get back to 4,240. And there's some of the scholars are saying, well, it could have been 4,236, could have been 4,242. It doesn't matter. We know because and the reason we know that is because they were using these calendars when the first dynasty started. So
Mm,
we know that in order for them to do that, we can trace it back to around 4240 BCE. Okay.
wow.
So we have all of the evidence, we have the artifacts, we have all of the astronomy to back it up, and the astrology. All of the symbols that we use for astrology came out of Africa. The Greeks just copied them and renamed them. Okay. The same thing with their gods. The Greeks themselves said that all they did was just rename the gods, but because they copied the attributes and the stories from the Africans. Uh, Thales, the first so-called Greek philosopher, went to Africa to study.
Yeah.
In his writings, he says he encouraged his students to go to Africa. But the Pythagoras never took claim for the properties of the right triangle. How could he? When they're already embedded in the uh, step pyramid of Saqqara, which was
Right.
2700 BCE, and of course, don't even talk about the Great Pyramid and the pyramids on the Giza Plateau. You couldn't when you go into, for
To
example,
this day, that they don't know how they built it. To this
yeah, we were
to this
squaring
day.
stuff so well. You go there today and you look at those squares and you're just like, oh my God. But they ascribe it to Pythagoras and they teach our kids and their kids these lies.
Yeah.
All right. Um, so our history is really amazing. It's really unbelievable because we've been so miseducated. Oftentimes, when I've given lectures and I'm showing people the artifacts and the evidence, but their eyes just glaze over because it's so unbelievable. Okay,
It
in
is.
terms
Yeah.
of what we've done. I mean, we were the first female physician was an African woman. The first physician, Imhotep, he was so great that the Greeks worship him as a god. Okay, Imhotep. We were the first people to come up with taxes depending on the height of the Nile River. People were taxed. We had the tax records to prove it. We had the first harbors in the world where when the Nile receded, they had these huge tunnels in the hills and they would store their boats until the following year when the Nile overflowed, and then they would bring the boats out. The first harbors. By the way, what we now call Palestine
Right.
and Israel was Northeast Africa
Africa.
until
Yeah.
after World War II. They renamed it and took Palestine and
Israel.
Israel out of Africa.
Sure did.
Okay. I mean, I have the documents in where we controlled King Tutmosis III, who was one of the greatest military strategists in the world, barring any, conquered all of that land, all the way from Nubia, all the way up into present day to the borders of Syria, up into Iraq. He controlled Iraq. He controlled everything from Africa all the way up into present day Iraq. In fact, there's a plaque, a stela that he left, a stela rather, that he left on the Euphrates River about his victories. So
About his
all that was,
conquest, yes.
yeah, all of that was controlled by black folk. And then when we go into Palestine and Israel, those were the initial inhabitants were black and brown people. There were no white people living in that area until they invaded, the Hyssoks invaded. Those were the first light-skinned people to even come into that area. So our history is so amazing. And what we need to figure out is, how are we going to teach these truths to our young folk so that when they come up, they will want to be astronomers. They will want to be physicians. They will want to be mathematicians. Okay, because we were the first of those disciplines. The first script in the world, the oldest script in the world, is the Medu Neter. Everybody else, the Persians, the people who invaded, copied that script, and the Greeks copied from them, and basically, so English can be traced all the way back to the Medu Neter in Africa. Okay, and so we need to find a way, and this is going to be our challenge. How are we going to get this information to our young folk so when they come up, they would look at the world through African eyes and be able to change the world? Because the problem that I see, we don't know what time of day it is. How can we?
Right.
When you don't know who you are, you can't determine the time of day. Because the beautiful thing about this, Donna, is once I started learning African history, I had to learn the history of everybody else.
Right. Because it's like an octopus. This is the core.
Yes.
Everything else is, is yeah.
Okay. And
Everything else are tentacles from the core, which
yes.
is cognitive act.
And see, I don't want to get into too much about the situation
Because
between
we
black
really
and white,
want to
but
celebrate the new year.
yeah,
Right?
I want to celebrate the new year. So that's a whole, this,
Yeah.
I don't want to go off into anything
You have
else
to
right
come
now.
back and give us
Right,
some more history
right.
lessons. But when we back up and talk about whose responsibility it is, well, it's our responsibility. And we have to take back the education of our children
Yes.
and bring back more community-oriented learning in our neighborhoods. And so that's, we grew up that way with community learning, but then, we moved on up. And I'm not sure whether that was the appropriate thing for us to do, because we've lost a lot of our connectivity with each other by moving on up and moving on out of our neighborhoods and not staying grounded and rooted, and making sure that our commerce was our commerce, like it always was. And then, that's a whole nother story on another day. But let's talk about the African New Year and how you're going to celebrate on the 21st of this month, which is Friday at 6 a.m. and how all that started.
Okay.
I want to make sure we get the nucleus of that.
Okay. It started last year when I woke up one morning and the spirit gave me the idea of exploring celebrating the first New Year in the world. I knew that we had created the New Year. And so I talked to a couple of folk at the AACS, and they were excited. So I said, okay, let me go and do some basic research, see what's out there, see who has celebrated this African New Year. We'll take the best of what I can find, and we'll put together a program. Well, to my surprise,
Nobody had done it.
Nobody had done it. Except in South Africa, they do celebrate a New Year, but see, they're in the Southern Hemisphere. That's 6 months difference.
Yeah.
That's a whole different thing. And they did have the first New Year, okay, but it wasn't based on on stellar calendar. It wasn't based on, they just saw some things and they do celebrate that. But we discovered in the northern hemisphere, the Africans on the Nile discovered the solar new year, which is really, different. So I couldn't find anything. I was really shocked. I found references from some of our African scholars
Right.
about the beginning of the new year in 6240. Some say it's 6236, some say it's 6240, and I understand why, because that was a four-year kind of a difference there, a possibility rather. And so I started going about the business of putting together a program. So I had to start from scratch. And through a lot of uh, burning the midnight oil and scratching my head and getting frustrated, we put together a program last year. And it went extremely well. It was just as if that 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 um, that that divine intelligence that we call God
Came
blessed
together.
us. And I'm gonna tell you why.
Mhm.
Yes, yes, and you were a part of that last year because you came with the beautiful poster that you're showing there that we still use. It's so beautiful. I can't ever
Well,
see it changing it. All
I had a
right.
lot of people helping me, but I'll take a little credit for it.
Okay. Um, so what happened? We decided to have a sunrise service, and we met at 6 a.m. on the 21st of last year. Now, let me give you the backdrop. It was raining all over Palm Coast. In
Yes, it
fact,
was.
when I got up, I'm like, oh shucks, we probably had to call this off. But I decided, I said, no, let me go out there because some people are probably going to show up. So I drove over to Jungle Hut Road Beach, which is where we're going to have it again this year. And when I pulled into the parking lot, the first person I see is the mayor of Palm Coast. He's there. Okay. David Alphin. And about probably 50 to 60 people showed up. We were all dressed in white.
Is that going to be the flavor this year
Yeah,
also?
yeah, everybody, we are encouraging everyone to dress in white and to bring a little chair because you can sit down, you don't have to stand up the whole time. And this was what was so phenomenal. It was raining and lightning and thunder and lightning all over Palm Coast. We're on the beach, we can see the lightning, we can hear the thunder, but no rain. In fact, the pastor uh, for AACS didn't show up to give a prayer because it was raining. He rolled over and went back to sleep. So did other folk in Palm Coast because it
Right.
was raining. Okay. Anyhow, so we had a beautiful ceremony with libations. We have this brother from Ghana and his wife. Oh, they do a wonderful libations. Then we had a prayer from Michelle from New York City. She's a pastor. And you're talking about spiritual. You're talking about the presence of the Almighty being there. It was heavy. And then we had a conga drummer, a friend of mine who was playing the congas.
Mm,
It was just a wonderful affair. So after close to 7 o'clock, we started packing up, going to our cars. And when we got to the parking lot, there was this beautiful double rainbow. I'd never seen a double rainbow. It was beautiful. And so I had a photo taken with Harriet, my wife, and I, and some other folk took the photo. We got in our cars, and once we started leaving the parking lot, it started raining.
unbelievable.
Unbelievable. So all of us were truly just amazed, and we felt that God had blessed us and that we knew we were doing the right thing. And so then at 10 o'clock, from 10 to 12, we had a program at the AACS. we have young folk involved. We're going to have the same thing this year. And then I do a presentation on the importance of the African New Year. And I go into slightly more detail because I have slides and I can explain a lot of stuff. Then we have some light snacks, and then oftentimes we ask people, what are they getting out of this? What do they feel? And some of the audience will express how they feel. So, and then again, we have libations, and we have a dance troupe from Tampa. They're wonderful. It's about 10-person dance troupe, and they are just out of sight. I saw them once when I was in Orlando, and I just had to have them to come to Palm Coast. So they will be performing. It was going to be a wonderful hour and a half to 2 hours
So
at
at
the
6 a.m. you meet at Jungle Hut Beach.
yeah, Jungle Hut Road Beach. Yes,
Oh, beach.
and when
And
that
where
is,
is that exactly?
well, if when you stay on Palm Coast Parkway, you go across the bridge, the intercoastal. Once you get across the bridge, it's the second street on your right,
Okay,
which is a Jungle Hut Road beach. You make a right, you go down about maybe a quarter of a mile, half a mile, and you'll
you're
see a
right
parking
there.
lot.
Okay. And
Yes,
so 6 a.m. on Friday, which
yes,
is June 21st,
yes,
where you'll meet to celebrate the African New Year. Then you leave there and go to the AACS, which is on US 1 in Palm Coast, and continue the celebration.
yes, at 10 o'clock.
Listen, I want to make sure that we have it all. Celebration continues from 10 to 12. Is that still the case?
Yes,
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
At
10 to 12.
AACS, and it's located at 4422 North US Highway 1 Palm Coast. Significance and importance of African New Year. The drum dancers, drummer troops, refreshments, libations. And we want to keep this to an hour so we can get it on Instagram. And so we're going to kind of cut it off right here. But it's a sunrise ceremony before January 1st, a celebration of the original African New Year, June 21st, 2024, 125 Jungle Hut Road in Palm Coast. Bring a beach chair and white attire is suggested. So thank you very much. We'll have to have you back on to get some more history. Every time I talk about the horoscopes, they say, it's against this, it's against that. And I say, I don't understand you. You tell me that God made the heavens and earth first. So talking about, right? So, but that's a whole another
Yeah, yeah.
conversation on another day.
Well, Donna, I would like to leave the audience with
Yeah,
this. And again, I thought of this because I'm really into ancestors, and I see my mother and father occasionally, and my stepfather, my in-laws. I was very close to them. So,
right.
by the way, we never died, but that's a whole different discussion.
That's another story, right?
Okay, but uh, I will leave everyone with this. History is not a burden. It's the illumination of the soul.
History is not a burden. It's the illumination of the soul.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Robert Whiting, for giving us a brief history lesson. We need to have you back, and we'll pick certain topics, I think, because
Okay.
there's so much
Yeah.
meat, right?
Yes.
It's like an elephant. You can only take a little bite at a time. And we appreciate you and all the people that will be involved this Friday, which is the beginning of
21st.
summer, right?
Yes,
Is
the
that
longest day of the year.
the longest day of the year, beginning
Yes.
of summer. And it is considered is there something else? A solstice? Is it a solstice?
Yeah, yes. It's the Hilarical rising of Sirius. So it's when Sirius comes up just now it used to be, let me
It
get this
used,
straight.
okay.
It used to be on that date. Now, over thousand years,
Yes.
it depends on your longitude and your latitude in terms of what time that will happen. So, like for example, in Florida, it will come up on different days. But
Right.
at one point, it did come up on June the 21st, the summer solstice. It has shifted now from thousands and thousands of years. But what we will do, we will observe the sun coming up on the 21st, and because the heliacal rising of Sirius changes, and it depends on where you are located.
Where you, yeah, where you're
Yeah, right,
standing.
right, right, right.
Exactly.
So now we get into some of the complexities, and there's reason for that. But anyhow, yes, but we're using this as a day of remembrance and
An
recognition
acknowledgement.
and acknowledgement
Right.
that Africans were the first people to discover and the solar year, the 365 and a quarter day year. The proof is irrefutable. And we want the world to know that.
Yeah.
And so we hope that everybody will come out who can to celebrate this special occasion, because this is our gift to the world. The whole world operates off of African time, the entire world. I mean, the 24-hour day is African. The week is African. We had a 10-day week. They messed it up by making it 7 days, which threw everything out of kilter because it's not in line with nature.
Right.
Okay. The concept of a month. We had a 30-day month. Okay. So the week, the 10-day week, all of those things are African. Those are our contributions to the world. Our young folks should
We
know.
need to know it. Right.
Yes.
So we want to celebrate Blackness 365, and we will
Yes.
have you back with
Okay.
topics, because there's just so much, right?
There's so much. Yes.
To put a record. Believe it or not, this stuff is going to be around for a long time. So, if we put a YouTube out there, if we put an Instagram out there, it will circulate itself more times than we can imagine. So I thank you for your time. I do hope that everybody will come out June 21st to celebrate the African New Year at 125 Jungle Hut Road in Palm Coast. The white is the attire. Bring a beach chair. And then from 10 to 12, we'll celebrate again at the African American Cultural Society Center and Museum, 4422 North US Highway 1, Palm Coast, Florida. Thank you, Rob, for being here. And as always, to the audience, when the lights go down and when the lights go out and the cell phone towers go down, all you have left is a flashlight and a good book. Thank you very much. Good night, everybody.
Thank you, Donna. All
Thank
right.
you.
Good
Good night.
night.